Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Today I'm speaking with Gabriel Rench. Gabriel is the host of the crosspolitic.com podcast. And during COVID, he got into a little bit of trouble with the authorities. So I figured I'd have Gabriel on, talk about that, and then talk about his podcast. And let's see where we agree and where we disagree. Hey, Gabriel, thank you very much for coming on.
Hey, obeyed. Thank you for having me on, man. I'm an American. I don't speak. I have a hard time with language sometimes.
Ah,
Obeyed.
don't worry about it, man. Like it's not exactly a common name.
Yeah.
Uh, so okay, I just want to start with this. With the COVID thing because I read about your what had happened. That I listened to a couple of podcasts you were on where you talked about this.
Yeah.
So you were with your church group during COVID, and
Yeah.
you were out. Were you singing hymns or were you reciting psalms?
Singing psalms and hymns.
Okay.
And what had happened was, March 2020. I live in Moscow, Idaho. It's kind of northern Idaho, up in
Okay.
what we call Chimney of Idaho, and it's a red state. It's a conservative state, but I live in a blue dot, a university town, a liberal town, and it was. I mean, they just freaked out during COVID, and even before there's one case of COVID in our town, March 2020, the mayor shut down downtown, shut down our economy here in town, and then like just within a week or two, he was out drinking beer and playing golf with his buddies, 5 miles outside of his authoritative radius of his shutdown. And so we, as Christians, we have a framework for processing these situations, or more let's say framework for first principles. You might want to call it first principles or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But as Christians, we're taught that God gave us three governments. That God gave us the civil government, the church government, and the family government. Those are helpful categories, and that's what the Bible teaches. And so we know that, and then God defines what authority each government has. So, God didn't give the government authority over my children. That's the family government, right? God
Mm-hmm.
doesn't let the civil government tell my kids what to do. That's daddy's and mommy's job. And so God defines each government and gives them their authority. Romans 13 is very clear about what authority the government has. Ephesians 5 is very clear on what church government has. Ephesians 5, 1 Timothy chapter 3, Titus chapter 1 is very clear on how God defines the church government. The church's job is not to hire cops to go arrest people. That God gave that to the civil government, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then Ephesians 6, various other examples in scriptures where God gave the family government and God defines the authority of the family government. So the family government, it's not my job to go arrest citizens in the street. That's a civil government. And so each government God gave us, he gave each government certain authority and structure to work in. And he didn't give each government unlimited authority. Right now, our civil government thinks it has unlimited authority. Our civil government thinks it can tell you to wear a mask on your face, how far apart you need to stand. Our civil government's just gone off the rails and thinking it has unlimited authority, but God's the one that defines each governmental authority. And so when COVID started, I principally knew that the government didn't have the authority to tell me to wear a mask. Like that, God didn't give that authority to the government. The job of the family government is, health, making sure the kids are healthy, health, education, and welfare. Basically, that sounds like a government organization, doesn't it?
Yep.
But the God of the family, that's the job of the family. My authority is to make sure my kids are healthy. My authority is make sure my kids are fed. That's the authority God gave me over my kids. And it's not the government's authority to tell my kids what mask to wear, how far apart to stand, and all that stuff. So I knew when the government shutdown started, the government just didn't have any authority. And so we started doing psalm sings and protests, I think as early as June. I had led open up business protests back in April. Our church went back to our church, not went back. Our church had been worshiping in car lots. We'd go to a car lot and worship because we deferred. We do believe in all this, and just stop me where you want to, Obaid.
Yeah.
But we believe in all this, that government does have a level of emergency authority or some emergency authority. Like,
okay, I did want to ask you about this, Gabriel, because this is one of the things I was commenting on during COVID, and like the hypocrisy of the government, and then what else then what they let happen with the BLM. So were your when you had the stuff in the parking lot of your churches or your church in the cars, were your parishioners the one that were fine? Because I remember reading about some parishioners, like some churches that had services in the parking lots. The parishioners were in their cars,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and as they were leaving, they were all given citations.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sorry, but you're not. That is social distancing. They were more than 6 feet apart. They were inside their cars.
Yeah.
Like, so I found that ridiculous. So I'm just curious: were your parishioners also? Did that happen to them, or were they able to do that?
That was in Canada, and I think either Kentucky or Missouri. I can't remember. Somewhere in the kind of Midwest South.
Okay.
It didn't happen to us. No one in my town, even though they had citation authority for this emergency shutdown or emergency order, no one in my town even got cited for this. I was the only one, along with another couple with me, that got arrested. Rachel and Sean, got arrested with me. That happened in September 2020. So that Black Lives Matter came through town during the summer. And of course, they weren't social distancing, and some of them weren't wearing masks and stuff like that. But it was our church that, when our church teaches that the government doesn't have unlimited authority. Our church teaches, the Bible teaches, not even just our church, the Bible teaches what role the government plays. And when you challenge the liberals' authority, and you're seeing this with the Biden administration, when you challenge their authority, they will send the FBI after you. They will send the Department of Justice after you. It's the authority that's what got them all hot and bothered. And that's why we kept singing psalms every month. We'd go to downtown and sing psalms for like 20 minutes, and it'd be just like, men, women, and children singing for 20 minutes. And then in September, we did it again. And so apparently we'd done it enough times where it pushed their buttons to where they came and had 8 cops out there basically arrest us. And so we started singing psalms that night. This is September 23rd, Wednesday night. And we this time we were in downtown for most of our psalm sings. This time we went to City Hall and in the parking lot. And when we got to the parking lot that evening on that Wednesday, they had spray painted circles every 6 feet apart. You go back and watch the video. It looks like a polka dot game in the parking lot. And they spray painted circles 6 feet apart so that they could objectively see we weren't standing 6 feet apart or wearing a mask. And so we started singing psalms, and immediately the cop came up to my mom first because he was a coward. I was standing right next to my mom, but he talked to a woman first. And my mom said, "Well, I'm with my son." And so we were legal for whatever COVID reasons. Family was legal to stand closer than 6 feet. And I just put my arm around my buddy next to me, and I said, "This is my buddy Tyler." And then the officer proceeded to ask for my driver's license. Now, keep in mind, I'm exercising my First Amendment rights: the right to worship, the right to petition, the right to assemble, the right to gather.
Mm-hmm.
I'm exercising like all the First Amendment, not just one of them. Not just free speech, all of it. And this cop comes up and asks for my driver's license. I said, "I'm not giving it to you. I'm the one honoring the Constitution. I'm the one." I'm the one legal here. You're illegally asking me for my driver's license. So we went back and forth with this arresting officer, and he just went answering my questions. I said, "You swore an oath to, defend my constitutional rights against this mayor. Like, your oath was for me, not for the mayor." And we went back and forth. He went answering my questions. So he proceeded to arrest me, handcuffed me, had to take. Yeah, it's so eerie, like retelling the story, but he had to take the hymn book out of my hands to handcuff me. I didn't have a Molotov cocktail. I didn't have guns. I didn't have any of that. He had to take my hymn book to handcuff me, and then walked me to the cop car. And he couldn't find the keys to the cop car. It was a hilarious moment. And so, you go back and watch the video, and all these people are around filming, and the cop is. They just aren't answering anything, kind of thing. And so I go to jail that night, and my sheriff worked to get me out of jail. So my sheriff actually stood up for me, not my police chief and not my arresting officer. And so my sheriff worked to get me out of jail. So I got out of jail that night, and I went right immediately into the studio, and we did a live show, which just went viral all over the place. President Trump retweeted my arrest. It just went crazy. And so that was kind of the COVID moment. I mean, you had all these cops all drawn into in small town liberal America here in Moscow, Idaho, all drawn into the belief that they thought our mayor could do what he did. And for our America, our small town mayor to think that he could sign an emergency order that obliterated our constitutional rights was just so asinine and incredible. And anyways, long story short, 3 years later, I sued him and won.
Okay, I was going to ask you about that. So, like, when you say you sued them and won, I mean, I don't want to get into it was monetary or whatever, but I was going to wonder if you maybe took this to like a First Amendment thing, because it is like I live up in Canada. I wish we had the First Amendment. Like, we don't have free speech rights up here. As much as people say, "Oh, we have free speech," I'm like, no, you don't. Just look at our rights. We have absolutely none. And so like for me, that would be a thing like that. So I'm just gonna go on a little bit of a side here. So I believe, like, I'm an atheist. I don't, I'm not a believer. I agree with you about the first principles and everything. Now, I might, like, I think you and I agree on goals, but we might disagree on the route or the tools to use to get those goals.
Like, the presuppositions is what I would call it.
Yeah, fine. So, I mean, if we have time and you want to get into a theological debate, we can. But it's because the way I'm seeing all of this, and my eyes, I was away, and a lot of people who listen to this will know, like, I was away from 2002 to 2014. I did a lot of contract work with the military.
Okay.
And I came back to Canada and I was like, what the hell happened?
Wow.
I was like the frog that was thrown into a pot of boiling water and just started freaking out. Right. I'm like, I left, and people would at least respect your right to disagree with them and say something that you didn't like. But now it was, and I found it especially around Islam, that you couldn't talk about it.
Yeah.
So when it got time to COVID and all these things were happening, like, I was talking about it in my country, it was just nuts. And then I was seeing all these double standards going on. I don't know if they have in the States or not, but I would love to have seen something like this go to the Supreme Court and like, no, you are not allowed to do this. Like, something was going to our courts here about the vaccine mandates, but now they're like, oh, well, they're lifted now, so the whole point is moot. It's like, well, it's not really moot. You let the government get away with something, and it should go forward.
Jacob Rayom, his church, Trinity Bible Chapel, they're in Ontario. They're in Waterloo, and their lawsuit to defend the charter rights, I think, was basically thrown out of the courts by the Supreme Court, or the Supreme Court decided not to hear it, which is just amazing. No, Canada has less legal protections than we do here in our country, and that's why you guys had pastors arrested for 35 days and multiple times. So we had
all kinds of things.
All kinds of things. Yeah. We had, my case and probably John MacArthur's case were probably the most notable here in the U.S. I also serve as a deacon at my church, and I'm just a kind of a known figure because of my podcast. And John MacArthur, he won $800,000. I won $300,000 in my lawsuit, but I sued for my First Amendment rights and my Fourth Amendment rights, wrongfully arrested, wrongfully detained, and everything. So I was grateful that I had those protections, but here's the thing though. Laws are meaningless unless you have people with good hearts. Yeah.
And it's not even people with good hearts. It's people who are willing to stand up and fight for them and like defend them.
Yeah.
Like that's what you need.
Yeah. Well, and what I'm getting at is probably the more philosophical. You're 100%. The Second Amendment is there when the First Amendment fails here in America. Right. So I absolutely think you need courage and all that stuff, but you don't get, that's why, oh my goodness. Was it John Adams said, our Constitution was made for moral people. You can't have a good society without good hearts and without a moral backbone, a moral outworking of the people, a consistent moral standard. and so all those laws are going to be meaningless. You can tell people who have murder in their hearts are going to murder out in the streets. You can tell murderers all day, thou shalt not murder. And well, they're going to murder. You got to change people's hearts. And that's what you're seeing in our country. And you're seeing in Canada. You got blackface Trudeau. You got morality all over the place. It's 32 flavors in Canada, just like it is here in the US. You got the trans culture, you got the LGBT culture, you got the feminist culture, you got moralities all over the place. And if you don't have one set standard, your constitution's meaningless.
I don't know what it's like where you are. I've been following the education system a lot.
Yeah.
Like I got into this because of all this, whatever, lack of a better term, woke stuff.
Yeah.
And I started because of the race things. I got called a white supremacist because I criticized Islam, and like I'm a brown guy. I'm sorry, like where did that come from? And so I just started, and then I saw what was going on in the education system. You can take Aristotle. You can, if you want, I'll quote Stalin and Hitler as well. But Aristotle, won't give me the boy until he's 7, and I'll show you the man. Like I think the Jesuits even took that up. If you change that education system, like you take civics out of classrooms, we can have the argument about public education. It can be a good thing, especially in places where you need it, but it has to be very, very well controlled. So if you're not teaching a proper civics, if you're not teaching kids not only your rights but your responsibilities, because I think that's part of the problem, like in like social studies, whatever they call it now. Oh, these are your rights. You have to stand up for your rights, but they don't talk about the responsibility of the citizen, which I think is key. Like you need that sense of civic responsibility. You're walking down the street and you see a tree branch, pick it up. Help your neighbors out or whatever. And so, like, I'm just wondering what the education system's like in your areas.
Yeah, so they're all woke, and some of them don't even know how woke they are. But this goes back to like first principles. I don't believe there should be a government public education because I don't believe the government has the authority. God didn't give the government authority to oversee education. And so once you start, God created the world in a certain way. And once you start rebelling against that way, things start going cattywampus. So you can look at times in history where the church was basically the civil government. Think of the Roman Catholic Church. Think of that, that they were disobeying God, and it messed up. It caused all sorts of problems. You can think of times in history where feudal societies, family societies, were running the government, and it was wrong and it was bad. And now you can look at our society right now, in our society in Canada and the U.S., where the government wants to run everything, and they're wrong. And so once you start disobeying God's creational order of how things were meant to be, you're going to get cattywampus. That's why the public school system is so off basis, and that's why the public school system has porn in their library, and that's why the public school system is helping kids transition without their parents' knowledge. It's just it's all this authority. It's all has to do with authority and what God has called us to do according to our different various governmental structures that He created.
Okay. Just so to clarify, because I think we're pretty much on the same page. When I say a public school system, I mean that, okay, the federal government should have nothing to do with it. Like get rid of the, Department of Education. And same thing here in Canada. I think it should come down to community levels. Yeah. Okay. You can say, all right, you know what? We need to know that people are going to do math at a certain level. Like you have to have those certain standards. And I think it's okay for, you're gonna have to have somebody to say, okay, kids when they get at a primary school, they should be able to do this kind of reading and this kind of math. When they get at a high school, they need to be able to, and actually make sure they do it, because all the kids that are graduating, they can't read or write, and can't do math. So
that's I would want to say, well, that's the family's job.
Yep,
it's the family's job to teach the math. It's the family's job to teach the writing. And so you have a breakdown at the family. And so another authority comes in and says, well, we'll fix that. And then they make it worse, is what is actually happening.
Yeah. Okay, fine. I mean, I could see where you're coming from. I'm just trying to, especially the last few years, I've been, just homeschool your kids. There's no way you can trust these teachers. And, I don't want to paint them all with a bad brush, because I do believe there are some decent teachers who are actually trying, but I mean, I've spoken to enough teachers and I've, parents and administrators, it's a combination of factors. It's the way the universities went, and so how the teachers were being taught. They were taught to see the world through this one lens, and so I mean, it is a cult. As far as I'm concerned, this wokeness is a cult, and they were taught to see the world only through that way, and that's how they're going to teach. Like I always use the example of Huck Finn, right? You can have a woke teacher teaching Huck Finn. Now, let's say you're opposed to public schools or whatever, but you find out your eighth graders reading Huck Finn in school. You're going to think, okay, Huck Finn, it's a decent book. There's nothing really wrong with it. Okay. I mean, I don't know where you stand on Huck Finn, so I'm sorry if I put words in your mouth. But you can take Huck Finn and you can turn that into a woke story.
Yeah.
Okay. You can say, okay, Huck, because he was white and he used Jim's emotional labor to find out about how bad Jim had it, so he didn't understand the problems of the slaves.
Yep.
And then at the end of the book, even though he lets Jim go, he goes back to his life of privilege, and he's just making himself out to be a white savior. So you can totally corrupt the meaning of that book.
Yeah.
Depending on how the teacher's teaching it. But for the last few years, like I said, I've been saying just homeschool. I also want to take into account that, okay, I agree with what you're saying, that should come from the family. The family should, my parents read to me. My parents taught me how to read. My parents made sure I did my homework, and I was lucky for that.
Mm-hmm.
I was a lousy student. I got good grades, but whatever. That's a different story.
Different problem.
Yeah, but at least they did that. And for the kids who don't have that, that's the problem with these things. As soon as they start getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But if you could actually keep it very, very local and very community based, even if it's like a bunch of parents getting together and making a pod school, it's just. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, a couple thoughts there. One is, this goes again, like, you have to cut with the grain. In other words, you have to cut with how God made the world. If you don't cut with how God made the world, you're going to come up with a Band-Aid solution that eventually is going to turn into cancer. So you might Band-Aid the situation, but it's eventually going to turn on it and eat itself. So, for example, if my kids go to Christian school in town, and this Christian school's mission is, even if you can't afford it, they'll take you. As long as you're interested and supportive and excited about the education that they're going to receive from the school, we'll take you. No, even if you don't got money. So there's community schools. What that means is the community should figure that out, not the government. So go back to, you mentioned, there's some good people in the education system trying to do good things. I know those people too. I got friends teaching in public school, in the same way though, that the Titanic, when it was going down, had all sorts of good people trying to help and rescue people. That was a good thing. But the problem is a first principle problem, and that's why you gave me the example of Huck Finn, and you can do the same thing with the Bible. You can say, well, Moses freed the slaves, and Moses was a liberator, and right. You can do the same thing, but what the fundamental issue that we should be seeking, and incidentally, what our university system was set up to defend and protect, is what is truth. If we can't define as a society what is truth, we're going to rinse and repeat societal destruction again and again. But you have to define what is true and nail that access point down there, and then whatever happens from that. So you can't reinterpret. If you know what is true, all of a sudden you can't reinterpret Huck Finn. If you know what is true, all of a sudden you can't reinterpret the Bible. If you know what is true, and so I want to start, and this is where your atheism and my Christianity will come into conflict here, which I think we're both pretty understanding here. We aren't covering our eyes on some of our fundamental differences, but I want to start with, in the beginning, Genesis 1, it says, in the beginning, God. Okay, that's a truth claim. Is it true or false? Okay. And if it's false, then I'm wrong. If it's true, then you're wrong. And so there's another way of putting this is there such thing as absolute truth in this world? In other words, what is true for me has to be true for Vladimir Putin in Russia, has to be true for the Hamas in Gaza.
Yeah.
Has to be true. Is there an absolute truth in this world that governs all of us?
Yeah, no, okay, look, if you want to talk about absolute truth, yes, I agree with you. And yes, I will disagree with you about, in the beginning, God created the universe. Like you and I will, we can argue about it. I'm sure we can have a good conversation about it. And I don't think we're going to change each other's minds, but at least, and I'm sure we can be civil as well.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
But yeah, okay. I do believe we need that absolute truth. And it's the things like, all the stuff that's going on in universities. You're talking about, well, they left that logos behind them. Right. And because when you have university professors saying, like, okay, this is from Foucault, which guy's nuts, but if you run across a tribe somewhere in the middle of a jungle that's never seen anyone else, and they believe the earth is flat, for you to teach them anything else is oppression. And it's like, no, but yes, they might be happy in their little village, and their 50 square miles of jungle if they go hunting or whatever, and they're living a content life. Like, I'm not saying anything about that, but they are not living the truth. And so when these institutions that were meant to protect the truth stray that far, that society is going to go like it's just going to go off kilter. It's not, we need to have that one guiding principle.
Yeah. And so I think what you're seeing right now is you're seeing two worldviews are colliding right now. A worldview that wants to discover absolute truth and what that is, and a worldview that only cares about power. And that's why you go out to, you got to the, to meet with this tribe or whatever, and you tell them that the world is round, and then white liberals come in and say you're a racist and you're oppressive. It's because what they're doing is actually ultimately they're creating the room for them to grab power. It's not about truth. And so that's why Biden is all about power. And I'd say a lot of conservative Republicans are falling into this trap too, where they think the battle is over power when it should be over truth. So the people like you care about trying to discover truth. You aren't trying to run a power play, but Trudeau is. Trudeau's wearing a power play, right? He can wear blackface and not be a racist. Trudeau can cozy up to China and somehow be the conservative, the capitalist in Canada, whatever, the representative of capitalism in Canada, whatever's going on, is because it's all power plays. And that's why they'll lie and twist narratives to keep their power. And so that's why I want us to, hey, let's talk about truth, because that's ultimately where you win.
Yeah. I mean, okay. And again, on just kind of sticking with this, like I'm not a joiner. Okay. Like, I normally don't join up groups, and I left before social media was a thing. So I never really spoke out. I was just, a regular average Joe, right? Like, where am I going to speak out? It was only after I got back that I started doing some of this stuff. And, so I got involved in like some atheist groups and this and that. And after a while, I'm like, yeah, it's not for me. But a lot of them, I'm still friends with some people in there, and, they're with similar mindsets. They'll ask me like, well, how can you be siding with, some Christian groups here about, like the trans stuff in schools? And I'm like, okay, I might disagree on the version of reality that they have or the path they're taking to that reality, but we both agree that there is an ultimate truth and that there is a common reality that we all share.
Yeah.
Whereas the other side says reality is whatever you want it to be.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, it's not even that we have nothing in common. We don't even have a base. Like, our foundations are completely different.
Yeah. Right.
And so that's, like I said, like, you and I might get to loggerheads about, specific claims of, okay, God did this or no, he didn't. Certainly. That's fine. Yeah. But we at least agree that there is a common, reality weaving this all together.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the other side doesn't. The other side, a man can give birth. I'm like, no, they can't.
They can't. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's why obeying this is you're a reasonable guy, because I think you're so close. In other words, you see a consistent nature. Like, you see a man who's born a man, you see X and Y and XX chromosomes, and you see the nature there. And you're like, well, that person was obviously built to have babies. That person was obviously built to protect his family. like he's strong, whatever. And so you can see kind of a consistent nature there. But the only way you get that consistent nature, the only way you can account for it, is there has to be a consistent creator behind it, an artist, a consistent creator behind it. You can't get consistent nature out of evolution, right?
Yeah. I mean, my response to that is we're still evolving. Like if you came back a million years from now, I don't think you would recognize what would then be considered human. That's
yeah, and I understand the argument there, but how does chaos produce consistent nature? That's what the evolutionary argument is chaos produce uniformity?
Okay, I'm not a biologist, but I'm going to do my best to try to
you don't need to be a biologist. You just need to be a logician.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, if you look at the evolutionary thing, so in mammals, for the most part, it's XX XY. If you look at certain birds, it's ZZ. What is it? Okay, so it's ZZ something
You're
W.
already getting far above me.
Okay.
You win already.
So no, but okay, like, and again, I'm going to get this wrong. So men are XY, women are XX, right?
I actually can't remember which one's which. I'll Google it while you're talking.
Yeah, in birds, the males are ZZ, and the women are like VW or WY or something like that. But it's still all the female birds are the ones that lay the egg, so they still have the different type of they still have that genotype, or was it so the hell is
we're XY, men are XY, women are X.
Yeah. But like in birds it's reverse, and then there's some. So when you say it's all consistent, it's consistent within species, it's not consistent all the way throughout nature. And you can have certain variations even with the XX and XY. There's 6 different chromosome pairings that you can have, but even if you have something that's not XX or XY, which is, I mean, it's a very, very small percentage, they still show traits of, okay, do you have male gametes or female gametes? And so they go by the gametes. Are you going to produce sperm or are you going to produce ovum? And it's the same. So it's the same thing with the bird. So like, it's, and that's like, I'd have to get into a lot of detail, and I'd have to read a lot, because I've read some of this stuff before, but I'd have to go back and read a lot more to come back and say, okay, this is what it needs. But it is not like when you say it's consistent. Yes, it is, but it's consistent within species, not or within. I don't know where mammals fall under, like phylum, class, blah blah blah, all that other stuff.
My kids would know that.
Yeah,
right now.
Yeah, I should call it my nephew in the 5th grade. He'd probably be able to tell me
exactly.
But yeah, so for me, it's like that. But okay,
what you described there is you described an intelligent creator. Like you can't get that kind of intelligence and nuance from chaos, which is what evolution. You can't get that kind of nuance and intelligence from stardust. We came from the evolutionary framework says, well, Big Bang happened, whatever, the beginning happened. So somehow out of nothing, evolution created something.
But that's not quite right. See, like, you're conflating two things. The Big Bang is about the creation of the universe, how stars and the stars formed after the Big Bang, how the planets and everything formed. That's about the planets forming. Evolution is about, it doesn't even talk about how life started on the planet, like, because there's a couple of different theories about that. Evolution is about how that life then went from single cell
to complex
to everything else. So the giraffe.
What I'm getting at is the philosophical ramifications of what's going on. So if out of nothing the Big Bang happened and the planet started out, and basically, so you have chaos that starts to create uniformity in the mountains, the single cell into the multi-cell, to the complex cell. But philosophically, none of that makes sense. That's what I'm getting at. I'm happy to argue some of the we can get in some of the biological arguments. Like, for example, the Grand Canyon has single cell and complex cells in the fossils at the bottom of the Grand Canyon all together. Like evolution can't explain that. It's all locked into the layers at the very bottom of the Grand Canyon, single and complex cells. So you have you can't explain the mutations over millions of years with that fossil record. But what I'm so we can get into biology, but what I'm trying to get at is the philosophy of the ramifications of the evolutionary framework. If chaos created order, and then eventually millions of years down the road created me and you through evolution, that just logically doesn't make sense. You understand what I'm saying?
Okay. But I mean, like, if you want, like, I don't know how I could talk about this without getting like kind of technical, but okay, so the giraffe, the way, like, here's where evolution is stupid. Okay, because it's adaptation, but it's like, okay, I'm trying to remember how this goes now. The trachea is so long. It's been so long since I've done this. I'm not going to do this justice. The trachea is so long that the way it evolved was, I can't even remember it, so I'm just even I don't even bother to try. But
maybe let me help. Let me. I think I know where you're going. Here, but and actually, let me just say I don't quite know where you're going. So respond to this. Let me put it this way: I have no problem with micro, mutation or what we'd call microevolution. Although I don't like that word, even evolution, because of the connotations. But I have no problem. If I move to a cold climate, I'm going to get used to it over time. If I move to a sunny climate, I'm going to get used to it over time. If a bird moves to, this climate. So God designed the world in such a way where it's intelligent, and our bodies and our families and our dynasties will adjust microly over time. What does not work is macroevolution, the big picture, from the Big Bang to the single cell to the complex cell over hundreds of millions of years. I mean, they found, if you want to get back into the scientific arguments, I mean, they found dinosaur tissue, in dinosaurs. You can't get that over, that tissue doesn't last, I think, more than like 40,000 years. So you can look at the Grand Canyon, back to the Grand Canyon, you can look at single cell and complex cell fossils on the same strata in the layers of the Grand Canyon. And so, but that's why so you can look at the science and see that evolution doesn't work, even the time frame that they've given with like looking at, things like dinosaur tissue. But the philosophical ramifications are, I think, the more dangerous problem with evolution. So how do you get truth out of a world that just is constantly evolving? You're evolving from what to where? Where's the world evolving to? Where does truth come from in this world that's just constantly evolving? If slavery was okay back in societies, and then homosexuality is okay now, what's wrong with us evolving back to a state where slavery is okay and homosexuality is wrong? We're evolving.
Okay, but see, like, I think you're like the evolution of life versus evolution of philosophy, or like how the world is changing. I think there's different things. So, like, okay, slavery was good or bad. We can get into that argument. I think I personally would stand on the side of it was bad. Shouldn't own people. Now, if a society goes back, and you don't have to look too far, because ISIS took slaves. There are slave markets still going on in North Africa as we speak. Right. So,
well, in America had slaves 107 years ago.
Okay, but but at one point they said, what, we as a society think this is wrong.
Yeah. And
so we think it's wrong, and we stop it, and we don't do it. There are other societies who still think it's valid. In my okay, I mean, this is, I think, where we'd agree, where you're talking about the First Amendment. The only way you're going to get to the truth of that is if you compare the values of the society, see which, okay, you've got one society that's got slavery, one that doesn't, which one's doing better, which one's flourishing better, which one's,
America did great.
Because I used to say, like, okay, it was somewhere around the mid to late 90s that things took a really bad turn. Like I can go back to the 60s and all that, but like a really like this really sharp turn was around that time. John McWhorter was saying like 1997. Up until about that point, everyone said, okay, yes, we do have a reality. We might disagree on what we think that reality is. We might disagree on how we think we got there, but we have a shared framework. And it was after that point that we lost that shared framework. And I think this is where one of the things where, a lot of people who are like the atheists, whatever, where I think that religion or at least tradition has a role to play in this. So I'll get back to the religion in a second. Okay. So before the late 90s, before like cable television and all that, like it really blew up, when now you got like 5 million channels or whatever. And you could talk about the Seinfeld episode the night before and like pretty much everyone at work watched it, right?
Yeah.
You got together for the Super Bowl, you got together for these big events, and you had these shared stories. And okay, these aren't religious or anything like that, but I mean, these could be stories you tell around a campfire. This could be, okay, they're not epic myths or anything like that, but if it's that kind of stuff.
Right.
We lost that. Whereas tradition and religion gave society that in some sense. Now, if you could have that sense of community, if you could have like those shared stories where, if you want to talk about, okay, just have Aesop's fables instead of like, I know you disagree with that, but like if you have those shared stories and you use these stories.
Aesop's fables.
Yeah. No, but what I'm saying is like, that's where I think religion got some things right. I have no problem with the community. I have no problem with, okay, give charity. I have no problem with look after. I have the problem with ISIS, right? With ISIS coming in and saying, okay, right. I mean, they were almost as harsh on Shia Muslims as they were on non-believers, right? Because they're not the right kind of Muslim.
Yes, sir.
Or, go back to the wars in Europe, Protestant and Catholic, right? You're not the right kind of Christian. Right. And I mean, that's why, because of things like that and other stuff, like I will not discount some of the Christian influence on that, but that's why you started getting secularism in Europe, where people were like, okay, you have your faith, I have mine, and we won't kill each other over who's Protestant and who's Catholic. Right. And so I think we need that kind of community, and I think that's where when all the new atheists and whatever came out, I think that's where a lot of them went wrong. They discounted that need for the community.
I'd say except for Christopher Hitchens.
Yeah, Hitchens was really
Hitchens
was, yeah. But there's also I don't know if there's a really good speech that Douglas Murray did, and I don't know if you've seen or read anything by Douglas Murray. So okay, he was an Anglican, and he became an atheist, but he still is kind of on the same wavelength as me. But he did this really good speech in a debate at Oxford, where initially he was supposed to be debating on the side with Dawkins, but then he ended up debating with two people he despises because the proposition was that religion has absolutely no place in the 21st century. And he said, okay, no, I can't agree with that. So he debated with two believers that he actually, he called them like his best frenemies. So yeah, I mean, but I can agree with, I can agree with that. I can agree with that, all that community stuff. And I think that's where you and I would have, common bond where you need that. Go ahead. Sorry.
I got about 10 minutes left.
Yeah, no worries.
Let me ask you this question. Because I agree with you. Religion does help with that, but that still doesn't answer the question, what is true? Because I believe there's false religions out there, and I believe, there's the true religion of Christianity. I believe the Catholics are wrong, and I believe, I got reasons for all this, hopefully objective reasons for all this, but the brass tacks kind of comes here back to the discussion of absolute truth. Like, why is murder wrong? What standard are you pulling from that is absolutely true for everybody that murder is wrong?
Okay, so we're generalizing here because you even said, like there's people with murder in their hearts and they're going to kill. So let's leave them out of the equation for a moment.
Certainly.
Okay. And you might not, you might have heard this before and you might think I'm just being glib, but I'm not. I think it goes back to, okay, we came out of the trees, we got into small groups. Groups needed to be strong so they could protect each other. If you kill a member of your group, you're weakening your group. So it's wrong. it still didn't have language then. And I think as we got into communities and stuff, and as we started speaking, and as we got more advanced, norms and those common values, okay, don't hurt your tribe, because if you hurt your tribe, you'll eventually hurt yourself, because the tribe next door will kill you or enslave you or whatever. And I think that's where the things of murder is wrong came in. Now, we can argue about the Christian ethic, or we can argue, like, even in Islam, it says, I mean, I know it says they don't have a 10 commandments, but it does say don't kill the innocent, but then it goes on to describe what an innocent is, and it's basically just a Muslim who believes one way. So, but they have that. So that, I mean, like I said, I think these came from things like that. So same thing with stealing.
Yeah.
If you steal from a member of your tribe, you weaken your tribe again. You create distrust. Don't steal from your tribe. And then again, that slowly became a norm that, actually Dawkins, when he talks about meme theory, these are the kinds of things he's talking about. These are evolutions on a societal level.
Mm-hmm.
That's not really anything to do with Darwinian evolution, like where you're going from a single cell all the way up to us type of thing.
Right. So, but what you're doing is you're only describing. You aren't defining. You aren't pointing to a standard. You're just describing, hey, this happened, this happened, this happened. And so we took kind of the best things that seemed to work, and then we kind of decided to live by those things that we think work best. So it's not pointing to a standard, it's pointing to a description. And secondly, if all you're doing is drawing conclusions from one tribe, but then the question comes, well, what if the tribe of Idaho doesn't like the tribe of Washington, and but the tribe of Idaho can grow and thrive if they're gang raping the girls in Washington?
Yeah, I mean, okay, look, that's happened throughout history.
Right.
I thought we'd come to a point, at least, but the last 20 some odd years has shown otherwise, where we said, okay, you know what, we're not going to do that to each other because of these differences. Now, I mean, again, I could point to things religiously where they believe a different thing, we're going to attack them. Mm-hmm. And they're thinking they're doing it from the word of God, right? Whether it's Catholics killing Protestants, whether it's Shia killing Sunni, whether it's Muslims killing Christians, or Christians killing Muslims, they all thought they were doing it to honor God, right? So, you have that in all societies, and I'm not going to discount things like, whatever, 100 million dead under communism or anything like that.
Right. You're fair. You're fair. Yeah. I think you're fair. You're hitting atheism, all this, but for me, it would come down to, well, first of all, is obeying, or Gabe, is obeying the definer of what is true, or is God the definer of what is true? Is obeying the standard, or is God the standard? It's man. Do you believe man's word over God's word? And ultimately, like, the one thing that we all have, we have two things that we all have in common. Me, you, Russia, Israel, whatever. We all make mistakes, in the Christian language is we all sin. We all make mistakes. We all sin, and we all die. And how you answer those questions have everything to do with the meaning and reality of this world. So if we all sin, that means there is an absolute standard that judges us all. Murder is wrong in Russia, just like it's wrong in the U.S. There's an umbrella standard that's saying that we all sin. And then if we all sin, we all die, then, well, is our life just meaningless? Or does our life have meaning because we were created by God? Or does our life have no meaning because we were created by stardust and evolutionary processes over millions of years? How we answer those questions, we all sin and we all die, has everything to do with, I think, the meaning of our lives.
Okay. Look, I know you got to go, so I'll cut it here because I think it's a good place to stop. I mean, I'd love to have this conversation for hours because we can go back and forth. And I'd actually then start Googling because I don't want to sound like an idiot.
Yeah.
But look, Gabriel,
I already Googled for us. So
no, it was very good speaking to you. And I mean, what happened to you is absolutely horrible. And it's like, for me, it's the double standard. Like, okay, I'll take today as an example. So I'm not going to get into argument whether January 6th was an insurrection, whatever this and that. Like I think at this point it's pointless. But you saw what happened to those people. Then did you see what happened on the Capitol today?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay. If these people, like, I think it was wrong to have arrested maybe some of them who were actually getting physically violent and hitting the police, whatever, fine, arrest them for assault and stuff like that. But
there's already a law there in place for that.
Yeah, but like a reporter's getting arrested and stuff like that, that was ridiculous. Yeah. But is anything like that going to happen to the people today? Because some of them were fighting with the police, some of them were hitting the police, some of them were pushing their way in. What's going to happen to them?
Because the Biden administration thrives off chaos because it gets them more power.
Yeah, it's the hypocrisy. Like I said, I want to let you go, but if you want to let people know where they can get a hold of you, if you send me any links, I'll put it in the description.
Yeah, you can go to crosspolitic.com. That's my website. That should get you to pretty much everything. My Twitter handle is GM Rench, RENCH at the RENCH. No W in that wrench. So G as in Gabriel, M as in Michael, Rench, RENCH, GM Rench on Twitter. And that's probably the best way to follow me is on Twitter. I don't really do much on Facebook anymore because they canceled us. YouTube tries to cancel us, and it's all that
stupidity. Yeah. I had my old Twitter account canceled.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming on and talking. It was good speaking with you.
Oh, Bane, thanks for having me on, man. Look forward to sharing the show.
All right. Thanks everyone for listening.